Hello, friend. Welcome to another episode of the Mount Rushmore of Everything. This week, we are talking about fairy tales. You want to start us off?
I'm afraid, but let's do it. I'm going to start with Snow White.
Okay.
You cannot talk about fairy tales without talking about the Grimm Brothers. And this was one of their most well-known stories, and it became popular all over Europe, not just in Germany. And there have been so many versions of it. Another thing that I was looking into was the villains in these stories. I think it's very iconic, the evil queen.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting that she wanted to be this most fair, right? Was the word that they used. And she turned herself into a very ugly looking person to go and trick Snow White.
Yeah.
Not exactly sure if it was the first or one of the first or just kept on with the tradition of the first love kiss. There were other stories that came up with that too. So it has a lot of little details like that are very unique to fairy tales that this one touches on. So that's why I'm going with Snow White.
I think I'm going to agree with that one, but we'll see.
Fair enough.
We'll see. I'm pretty sure I'm going to agree with that one. Admittedly, in my list, I'm going to show a little bias probably towards the ones that I think are super iconic and come to mind for a lot of people for fairy tales that haven't had a movie that they can ride on.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those is Hansel and Gretel, which I chose because it's one of the consistent top fairy tales listed that I thought didn't ever have that advantage of a fairy tale movie or a Disney movie or any movie, I don't think. I think there's maybe a couple out there. But to me, when I think fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel is one of the first to come to mind for me. And I thought it was also one of the most tightly coupled with the idea of Grimm's fairy tales. And Grimm's is sort of that gold standard in fairy tales. And Hansel and Gretel is so tightly bound to that I thought Hansel and Gretel.
I don't have them in my list.
Fair enough.
So next one?
Next one.
All right, I'm going to go with Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes.
We agree on that
I
one?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is one of those that I remember from very early on as a very popular story to read. I read it. I watched it in cartoons. I watched it in theaters. I watched it in school also in one form or another represented. And again, like that gold standard fairy tale story, I think it also has a very good villain in it.
For sure.
That was one of the things that I was thinking would be important. I think the whole story is iconic, you know, the grandma, also the iconic lines. Why are your eyes so big? Well, to see you better, my dear.
Yeah.
And then you have the hero, the woodsman that comes and saves the day.
This is the other major one for me that I thought this is one that stands above the rest because there is no Disney movie attachment, right? There's no iconic. Yes, there are a couple movies of this, but they're all like they're not iconic.
Not at
Disney
the level
movies.
of the Disney.
Exactly. So I know that the level of iconic in my head that this story is truly off of the fairy tale, not the Disney-fied version of it. Is the fairy tale? It is the book that maybe my mother read to me growing up, right? So I know that it's based off of that. And because of that, that's why it's really locked its place for me, as I thought this truly stands on its own, similar to Hansel and Gretel for me, where I think doesn't have the movie advantage, and yet it is still iconic. I would even argue a little more so. This is probably the one I would most entertain for non-negotiable status, even though I still wouldn't put it there. So for my third one, I'm going to go with Cinderella. I struggled with it a lot because I'm like, Disney.
Yeah.
But then when I looked up lists of fairy tales, it was consistently that number one. It was in every top 10. Some of the other ones, there's some variation, but this was the one that consistently was like number one. And I have to admit, I personally thought that I associated more with the Disney movie. So it took a long time of researching for me to be sort of convinced. I ended up having to think of it like, which ones will I be most ashamed of not having picked when the commenters are like, this is the right answer.
Yeah.
And not necessarily about the commenters so much as like, what are the ones that I think to myself, I would feel most bad about leaving off? Because I don't think there are any that are so clear on there. So I had to adjust the logic a little bit. One of the oldest fairy tales, apparently, one of the first Disney did decide to adapt, which again, correlation, causation, right? Like, is it famous because of that, or was it chosen to be one of the ones they produced because it was so famous? I would assume it's a little bit of both.
Back then, they had free range. They didn't have the problem that they have now. Like, we've done all of them.
All the stuff, yeah.
You know, and if we didn't, somebody else already did something.
Yes.
So I think that speaks for the popularity of that story. That would be the princess story, quintessential princess story.
That's another thing I came back to.
When you think of a princess story, you don't think of Snow White. You don't think of Sleeping Beauty. You think of Cinderella.
Agreed.
It also has a very iconic villain, the stepmother, together with the stepsisters. But you know, it's
sure,
it's her.
Does that mean you agree?
I agree.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Admittedly,
I said yeah.
I didn't catch that in
so
there.
we're 2 for 2.
Okay.
I have 2 that I'm considering.
Okay.
And one is Sleeping Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is The Three Little Pigs. Man, it's hard. I think in this one, I'm going to have to go with The Three Little Pigs. It's more well known as a fairy tale, even though there has also been versions of it on TV and movies. But when you're a kid and they're reading you fairy tale stories, it's going to be Little Red Riding Hood or Three Little Pigs.
Yeah.
You don't even need to read it. People know the story. Against it, this one, it has the fact that there is not a lot of magic in it. Mm-hmm. If you don't take in account that these are animals doing, anthropomorphic things. Sure. The other ones do have that. I mean, I guess Little Red Riding Hood doesn't either. But again, it has the iconic things in it. Each one had its house, and it has a very good moral to the story also, which I think it's fine.
So I'm actually not even going to go with Snow White. I'm going to bail for your other pick. I agree with your Three Little Pigs. Sort of back to the logic I used for Little Red Riding Hood and Hansel and Gretel. Three Little Pigs is an iconic story that I think everybody knows and could almost recite and remembers the hay or straw or whatever in the wood, in the brick. And to me, like a fundamental part of a fairy tale is those basic components of it, which everybody can tell a more or less correct version of Little Red Riding Hood, right? Even if you haven't heard it in years. Hansel and Gretel's, I think, is a similar thing.
Yeah.
And certainly, I think The Three Little Pigs is a similar thing, where the story stands on its own, and again, it doesn't have that advantage, a bias that one could have of it has a Disney movie, and I'm giving it points for that Disney movie that maybe it doesn't deserve. No, it stands on its own. It's so transcendent that, unlike some of these other stories where I feel like, you either know it as a fairy tale specifically, or you know it more as a movie, I feel like The Three Little Pigs is such a pervasive story in society that it's almost like an analogy that you just implicitly understand. So let us know what you think. Drop a comment. Tell us the 4 that you think deserve to be there. Hey, we might totally disagree on all 4 because I think this is a difficult one. We're pretty pleasantly surprised that we happen to go 3 for 4, but it also makes us feel better about our picks, probably.
Yeah.
So let us know what you think. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed this content. And hey, if you enjoy this content, you should also subscribe. Click that little notification bell. That way you know when new videos come out. We appreciate you for watching. We appreciate you for your likes that you inevitably dropped. Am I right? And we will talk to you next time. Let us know in the comments. Is that a real version? Is that Mandela effect? Do you not know what Mandela effect is? If so, don't ask in the comments. Go Google it.
Go look at other videos. There are plenty out there for you.
Plenty.
On that. Or at least I remember that there were.
See, if you didn't laugh, that means you don't know what that means.